So we're less than 1 month away now from Budget D-Day. That is, of course, April 1st, the legal deadline for the legislature and the governor to agree on a spending plan. So far, there is no agreement in sight. A big sticking point, as we have discussed numerous times on this show, is the so-called millionaires tax. The Assembly Democrats want to extend it. The governor and the Senate Republicans do not. Generally speaking, labor unions who stand to lose a lot under Cuomo's budget are pro-millionaires tax. And instead of the usual budget air war, they're trying a new approach to get their point across. This new labor-backed organization called the Strong Economy for All Coalition debuted today. And we are joined tonight by its executive director, Mike Kink, and also by Mary Brosnahan, who is a member and is also the executive director of the Coalition for the Homeless. Thank you both for your time.
Thanks, Liz.
I appreciate it. Mike, I'd like to start with you. First of all, you just recently left the Senate Democrats' payroll, so you understand unusually how the inner workings of the legislature operate. But this is a new approach, like I mentioned. So could you just tell us a little bit about it? Instead of spending money on ads, you're going to spend money on canvassing and grassroots organizing.
It's an effort to bring union power and community power together to change the terms of the debate a little bit. I think both unions and community groups have found in recent years that educating people from the ground up and getting them active is often more effective than blowing a ton of money on TV commercials. I think the unions and the community groups are both committed to deep education, to workplace education, to program site education, to canvassing, to mobilization, local district office visits, talking to legislators, talking to elected officials in their districts, and to work through the budget on to other arenas where we can change the terms of the debate and hopefully rebalance the economy, try to rebuild the middle class, try to make government work effectively for everybody, not just for the wealthy few.
Okay, Mary, can you talk about why your organization decided to join up with this? I mean, obviously, the ideology here is what people might call progressive or coming a little bit from the left. So I get the ideology, but why would you endorse this approach?
Well, it's quite simple. We've seen the governor's budget come out, massive cuts. Just to give you one example, the coalition runs a walk-in crisis services office and also does eviction prevention. Our budget for those two service provisions would be decimated by the governor's cut. And so all we're saying is this isn't a new tax. We just want to continue the tax rate that's in place. And as it relates to the education field, we have a record number of homeless children, and when kids become homeless, they fall farther and farther behind in their education as they don't have a stable place to operate out of. And so we very much want stability for these families. We want the education and many of the other things that are called for from the broader coalition.
You're talking...
I think the community...
Go ahead, Mike. Sorry, go ahead.
The community groups in the coalition and the unions both recognize that there will be some cuts. You can't close a $10 billion budget without cuts. But I think there's a lot of common ground in that homeless kids didn't cause the economic crisis. School teachers and snowplow drivers didn't cause the economic crisis. If we're really going to have shared sacrifice, we need things like the continuation of the millionaires tax so that government has the resources it needs to be effective.
Okay, when we say, and I feel like I've said this a lot, but I'll just say it again, when we say that this is the millionaires tax, it's actually $200,000 for an individual is the threshold, and I think it's $300,000 for a couple. So it's not actually $1 million per year that people are earning, well, right?
75% of the assessment is paid by people making more than $1 million a year, and an even higher percentage than that, about 85%, is paid by people with more than $1 million in assets.
Okay.
It's also on the marginal income above $200,000 for singles and $350,000 for couples. So if your combined salary is $350,000, you don't pay a penny more tax from this assessment. You only pay it above that. So it is mainly a millionaire's tax. I think it is.
Okay. So yesterday, Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver said that he is open to the possibility of changing the threshold at which this tax might kick in. So if in fact that's the case, where you have this 85% of folks who really are indeed millionaires are paying the bulk of this, this, then would you be open to the idea that you would drop the bottom out and have only the honest-to-goodness high earners paying this? And before we debate the ideology of that, is that something that you guys think is okay?
I think it's fine. I mean, it's the legislature's job to take the governor's budget and make modifications. Our coalition is really about making sure that there is truly shared sacrifice. And right now, the highest earners in New York are not being asked to pay more. Continuing the tax or some version of the tax is the right way to go.
Mary, the reason why this is often so difficult for organizations like yours is because it's hard to drum up sympathy, I think, particularly for people, of course, understand generally that the homelessness is terrible and they want to combat homelessness and they give money to combat homelessness, etc. But generally the voice of people who are homeless is not as loud as, say, someone who might be able to hire a lobbyist. Is that the motivation to join a coalition in hopes that there might be strength in numbers in this kind of effort?
Well, we certainly welcome the partnership for exactly that reason. There are strength in numbers. But I have to say that, you know, even in recent dealings with people like Michael Mulgrew, across the specter of labor unions, people get it. I mean, last year, over 113,000 different people became homeless in New York City. And most of those were families. And so that's the most visible face of what's terribly wrong with the income inequality in New York City and New York State. And that's something that resonates across both, you know, people who are donors to the Coalition for the Homeless, but also for the teachers union. Keep in mind that a lot of those schools that are being targeted for closure have a very high proportion of kids that are homeless.
I think that's one of the great things about this coalition in the post-Wisconsin era. It really is about unions and community groups coming together to help the entire population. We're looking to help people who are low income. We're looking to rebuild the middle class. Certainly the unions are interested in helping people who are in unions, but they've reached out, I think, pretty aggressively and authentically to build common cause with folks that aren't in unions, with immigrants in Bushwick, with homeless people all over New York City, with organized communities that Citizen Action and New York Communities for Change are organizing all over the state. I think it really is an authentic coalition to get unions involved in helping everybody, and I think that's something we can be proud of and active about in the coming weeks and months.
You guys started with a budget of $5 million, and the bulk of this, according to published reports, is coming from SEIU 1199, which is the healthcare workers union. Is that correct?
I think the unions have all made serious commitments. I don't think it's exactly accurate. 1199 certainly is putting up significant resources, but all the unions and the AFL-CIO, the state federation that are involved in this, have made significant commitments of resources for organizing, for public communications, for advocacy. So I think it really is a shared effort.
Okay, because the reason why I ask is because 1199, of course, is also, was deeply involved in the Medicaid redesign task force and is now supporting that, and that is a governor-backed effort, a governor-embraced effort. When it comes to the millionaire's tax, that is not necessarily in something that the governor supports. In fact, he is opposed, and he's digging in on it. Every time we ask him about it, he says, nope, new tax, can't do it, moving on.
Yeah, well, I think tactically, you know, the coalition is very much focused on the Senate right now. It's clear that Speaker Silver and a supermajority of Assembly Democrats are strongly in favor of keeping the millionaire's tax and restoring the worst of the cuts. So the coalition is very much focused on the Senate, on Republicans, on Democrats, and on making the case that we can't close a $10 billion budget gap with 89% cuts, 8% one-shots, and 3% revenues. That's not shared sacrifice. Continuation of the existing millionaire's tax is the right way to go. I think senators will come to understand that, and I think ultimately the three-way negotiations over the budget will reflect that as well.
And Lisa, if I could just piggyback on what Michael said, keep in mind that if this tax is extended, that's an extra $1 billion in this fiscal year, but $4 billion in the coming years. So although the governor may be publicly saying that he's adamantly against this, there must be some part of his administration that recognizes that we're trying to do a favor here. We're trying to ease the burden of just massive cuts upon massive cuts.
And one detail that's coming out this week is that because of the way New Jersey residents who work in New York City pay their taxes, if we get rid of our millionaire's tax is going to be a $350 million gift to Chris Christie in New Jersey. Those residents will be able to keep that money. They currently deduct it off their New Jersey taxes. So if we're talking about millionaires, there's every reason to make those Jersey millionaires pay their New York taxes if they're working in New York.
So what is your next move in terms of this campaign? You sort of did a formal kickoff today where you had a rally. There was a lot of talking and a lot of sort of boosting the message and really speaking to the grassroots. But then what comes next?
Well, it's a short-term sprint on the millionaires tax. I think all the groups will be working together. And you can see on our website at strongforall.org the breadth of events that we have going. 1199, CWA, UFT, the Alliance for Quality Education, all of those groups will have hundreds, and with AQE, 1,000+ people in Albany this week and next week. They'll be meeting with legislators in Albany. They'll be meeting with legislators locally. There will be grassroots efforts all over the state on the millionaires tax. After the state budget, I think our coalition is going to work on some really interesting things around organizing low-wage workers, around making big banks and Wall Street pay back the bailout, stop the foreclosures, perhaps provide some relief to students on student loans and public assistance beneficiaries on their EBT checks. We're going to be doing some work around changing the terms of the debate and helping to get the voices of poor people and working people back into discussions about government policy, about government budgets. We're going to be looking to work on job creation. I think all of the unions and all the community groups know that New York needs more jobs than we have right now. We've got to work on wages and benefits. We've got to work on health care reform implementation. I think there are a number of issues where government needs to go to bat for regular people.
Okay.
Government can't just go to bat for the wealthy. They've got to have policies that work for everyday New Yorkers.
Well, we're going to see in the next 3.5 weeks or so if Governor Cuomo is going to take you guys up on the favor that Mary says you're trying to do for him. I will be surprised. But, you know, stranger things have happened. It is, of course, Albany. I want to thank you guys. Mike Kink, thank you. Mary Brosnahan, thank you very much. We'll be talking to you guys again, I'm sure.
Thanks a lot,
Liz.